Hi everyone, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine, and today we are continuing our botany lesson. I'm using the Live Education Waldorf curriculum for botany, and in this lesson we're going to be working on bulbs and lilies. Specifically, we're going to be looking at onions. Now, our previous lesson ended up being a two-part lesson. We began with garlic. I intended to do garlic and onions together, but we ended up doing them on two separate pages. So I'm going to share with you our previous lesson and the resources that we're using for this lesson. So we typically do a 2 to 3 day learning cycle where I'll present the information at the close of our lesson, and then on the following day we'll do the lesson work, which includes illustration and written content. So for this lesson, I'm using this book called Plants of the Qur'an, History and Culture. This is a stunningly beautiful book. The watercolors are breathtaking, and it has a lot of information about the different plants that are mentioned in the Qur'an, and it has resources. It's just a really great resource for this unit. So we're going to be using the page on onions. We previously used the page on garlic, got a lot of really excellent information, and the page on onions are these pages right here. It goes through different varieties as well as the flowers. It's really beautiful. For this lesson, I'm also using Botanicum. This is another really beautifully illustrated book that also comes with information. I usually find this book to be great illustration inspiration, but it typically isn't enough information for me to use for our main lessons, and I end up using other resources to complement this book so that I have enough material in order to present the lessons. Now, the main lesson book comes with usually enough information, but sometimes there are opportunities for you to depart from the curriculum and bring about your own unique lessons. And since this section on bulbs and on cereals and monocots is quite diverse, you could really choose a number of angles in order to teach this lesson. I'm using Plants of the Qur'an as much as I can for these lessons, which I'm actually including far more than what the curriculum suggests, which is completely fine if you have the time and the flexibility. So this page, this 2-page spread that talks about bulbs, has some gorgeous illustrations here. We've previously done the garlic, and now we're going to be doing the red onion. Another option would be to do some of these bulbs as flowers, but I wanted to use ones that were mentioned in the Qur'an so that we had some religious and cultural significance as we're doing these lessons. So for this lesson, I am using my main lesson books that we get from A Child's Dream. These measure 9.5 inches by 12.5 inches, and rather than doing these lessons on a chalkboard, I am doing them here in a main lesson book that my daughter can then copy. For this lesson, I have the illustration, which I used my Sargent Art chalk pastels for. I've pulled the colors that I'm using for this lesson and the previous lesson. I also have our chalk pencils. These are General's pastel chalk pencils, and these work really well for detailed work. They don't blend quite as much as the chalk pastels, and so in combination they work really well to get some detailed work. You do need to use a matte fixative once you are done, otherwise your chalk drawing will smudge. And then I did add the content here that my daughter can read to create her own content for her main lesson, or she can use portions of this as copy work. And for this lesson, since we're going to split it up into garlic and onion, we're going to go ahead and on this facing page, we're going to start the illustration on onion. And I'm going to make it mirror image so that we have this garlic bulb on the edge of the page. We're going to do the onion on this side with a cross section of the onion, and then we'll add our content here. First thing I'm going to do is choose the colors that I want for this illustration. Since it's right after our garlic bulb illustration, I still am using some of the colors and the basic technique for doing this illustration. I'm going to start with the onion on the left side, and that way we have some symmetry with the illustration on the right side, which has the garlic bulb, and then you can see both bulbs on either side with the cross section towards the middle, and then we can do the written portion each independently on both sides of the page, but so that by the time we're done, there's some lovely symmetry with our illustration and our written content. So an illustration like this can come together very quickly with your chalk pastels, especially when you're doing them on a small scale in a main lesson book, which measures 9.5 inches by 12.5 inches. Of course, you can do this on the chalkboard. I used to do a lot of the illustrations on the chalkboard in the past. I ended up making them quite large, and that way everyone could see them. We're not like right next to a main lesson book, but I'm actually finding working in a main lesson book a little bit easier. This way we can also keep our illustrations, and of course we are going to need a matte fixative in order to protect our work when we are done. You need to spray your chalk work, otherwise it will kind of spread and smear and get on other work in your main lesson book. But working on a chalkboard means that we need to erase the work when we are done, and we need to move on. And this way we can keep our work longer and indefinitely, of course. And then we can also refer back to these illustrations and the lesson even when it's time to move on to the next lesson, versus if it's on a chalkboard and we need to erase it to move on, it makes it a little bit more challenging. So I'm really enjoying doing these illustrations, especially doing with the chalk. So this main lesson block on botany has spanned 2 years because we started it the previous year in the fall. We intended to finish it in the spring and we didn't get to it. So we are doing some leftover work from the previous year. And so the first half of this main lesson book has all of the illustrations using color pencils. And this half of the main lesson book and this portion of the main lesson block, we are using chalks, chalk pastels, and chalk pencils. So the chalk pencils are new for us this year, and I'm finding that they can provide a lot of detail and also blend the chalk really well rather than using a blender. And I really like how we can get a lot more detail using our chalk pencils rather than just our chalk pastels. If you're working on a chalkboard, you can get a lot of detail using your chalk pastels. But when you're working in a smaller scale, then it's a little bit more challenging to get that detail. I'm doing the cross section of the onion, and at first I was very hasty with it and didn't give it much thought, and then after I applied more color, I realized that the purple wasn't quite right, and then the red wasn't quite right, and trying to find just the right color for the cross section of the onion was a little bit challenging. I ended up mixing some colors together, and in doing so kind of lost some of the whiteness that comes in a red onion except for the center. So that's the first time that I've had a bit of a struggle finding the right purple and pink color, because often we are working with earth tones, the browns and the greens, and I know how to blend those colors fairly well, so this was a bit of a challenge. I hope that you enjoyed this botany lesson and the illustrations that went along with it. I love the way that it turned out. I did use a matte fixative in order to spray the work before writing the content. You can find all of the materials that we used on the blog post that accompanies this video. Don't forget to check it out. You can find that link down in the description box below. You can find all of the resources that we use as well as other tutorials and videos. And if you'd like to see how we're homeschooling on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram and now on TikTok at Pepper and Pine.